So, today we are going to be diving into mom guilt. And this was something that was really real for me, especially after having my youngest daughter. And for those of you who don't know, she has a rare congenital heart defect, and I really blamed myself. And I never thought I would get to a place where I would be accepting of the fact that maybe things weren't 100% my fault. I thought that the control, I thought that, yeah, all of it. I thought that if I blamed myself, if I used guilt, maybe this wouldn't happen again. And it might sound really, uh, either you're totally relating or you're like, why would you blame yourself for something like that? But through my studying of mom guilt, I've started to recognize that, mom guilt doesn't come in one pretty package, right? Mom guilt uh, doesn't just manifest itself in one way. We kind of see it trickle through every part of our life. And if we're not careful, it kind of takes over and it becomes this thing that stops us and keeps us stuck, and it makes us not be able to move into the mother that we really want to be, and even more than that, the mother that our children need us to be. I say this in so many of my YouTube videos, but it is so important to me that I am always trying to grow myself and uh, really trying to change how I look at things and who I am as a parent, because through my own self, through my own self compassion, my self love, I'm going to be able to pour into them. And so, in today's live, I really hope that I can give you a full picture of mom guilt, how to handle it, what to do when you're starting to feel it, how to overcome it. And I'm also going to touch on things like freeing yourself from the shame that happens when we have mom guilt. We're going to talk about being really hard and critical of ourselves. It's really common for moms to do that. And the last thing I'm going to touch on is negative self talk, and really coming to an understanding of what we can do and how we can talk to ourselves so that way we can be able to give that self compassion and show that to our children. So, with all of that being said, I want to start by sharing a bit of my journey with mom guilt, because I think it's really helpful to know the context of where it's coming from within myself. So, I was really surprised how early mom guilt started. I got pregnant with my first. It had taken us quite a while. I say quite a while. It was about 8 months of trying and actively trying. And I was like, yeah, I had this guilt that I was doing something wrong at all times, that I was hurting my unborn baby. I was so fearful of miscarriage. I had anxiety, and I'll never forget the moment that I had just taken a pregnancy test. It was positive. And after the initial excitement wears off, you know how you start Googling and you start typing in things like, will anxiety hurt my baby? Uh, will, eating ketchup hurt my baby? You start typing those things in. And I remember reading this article that talked about um, our emotional state during pregnancy and how important it was, and how anxiety could make a child anxious. And I carried this guilt for, my child being anxious. I didn't want her to become anxious. That was the thing, the weakness within myself. And I surely did not want her to have that. And so I actually, just a couple weeks later, I started to have a panic attack because I was bleeding and I thought I had miscarried, and I had, basically I had done this to her. And so the mom guilt that I carried from that moment was immense. And I thought that, like, okay, after, I go to the ER and they tell me, oh no, actually, we have no idea what's going on with you. You're totally fine. Your baby's totally fine. just go home and rest. I thought that the mom guilt would go away. I figured, well, this was kind of like a one time thing. But as my daughter, I mean, came earthside, and then eventually we started getting into toddlerhood, and I would yell or raise my voice in a way, or say something to her, or even get really angry, maybe not even outwardly, but inwardly, and I would just feel this guilt for the way that I felt. And I started to realize that this was becoming a bigger problem than I thought it was going to ever be. I didn't really picture myself to be somebody that would carry so much guilt. And I think part of the reason why I carried this guilt was that if I continued to guilt myself, maybe I wouldn't I wouldn't continue acting the way I was. I wouldn't continue doing those things. It's kind of like a form of punishment. If you are hard and critical on yourself, you're totally relating to me. Just give this a thumbs up. Give this live a thumbs up. Give it a heart. Because I think that there are more moms than we even realize. I mean, parents in general, that use guilt and shame to motivate us to do better. And truthfully, you know, shame is, or guilt, sorry, is not a terrible thing. It's actually a really good motivator, right? It's a really good motivator for us um to do better, right? To try better. And I think that it's important that we remember that we can use guilt in a very positive way, but it shouldn't be what we're using as a form of punishment for ourselves, because that's actually just going to keep us stuck. But keep sticking with me here, because I'm going to touch on that a little bit later in this video. So let me see here. Let me track. I got to look at my notes, you guys. I'm going to get off topic. Okay. So I felt like I was in this terrible loop. I think that I thought that if I could uh, keep guilting myself and keep shaming myself, that the behaviors that I did not like about myself were going to stop. And the truth is that is not true. And I really wish that somebody told me that, not just that, like, the things that were happening with my children weren't a direct result of me, but I wish that they told me that, like, they're completely separate than I am. I think that I thought that my children were an extension of me, and so every behavior and everything they did uh, deserved judgment, not only from me, but from others. And so I would feel guilt, like I wasn't doing the right thing, or there was something wrong with me because of the way that my daughter would behave, or the different things that were going on with her, my youngest, medically. It was like, it was all a representation of the way I was parenting. And so I want to give you this love and this compassion today, and this really gentle reminder that your child is not an extension of you. They are their own little beings, their own selves, and it's not our responsibility that they behave in a certain way, that that they do a certain thing, that their health is a certain way. Their body is figuring out how to respond, how to react, how to do all these things. And it's not a reflection of who I am and who I am as a parent. We are working on these weak spots, within our child's life. And, that doesn't make me a bad mom. For example, like if we're out in the store and let's say one of the girls starts having a meltdown over wanting, Cheeto Puffs. And I said, no Cheeto Puffs today. And they're having an epic meltdown, right? And I start feeling that judgment. And then I start feeling that guilt once I get back in the car, because it's my fault, right? It's my fault that they aren't responding in a way that I feel like is a well-behaved child. And, what ifs start coming up, the fear starts coming up. I think that's where mom guilt really comes from, is like this fear of our children becoming good, independent, loving, compassionate, empathetic little beings. And so when we start seeing behaviors that don't align with that, it's like, oh boy, this needs to stop, right? And then the same comes with, kind of those health things. Like I've explained, I've been on both ends of the spectrum here. And so when we talk about the health things, it's like there is only so much within my control. And at some point, I have to be willing to let that go and say that I am doing the very best I can. And the only way to get to both of these endpoints, I guess, is really to find that self love and that empathy and compassion for yourself. And I want to just, I don't know, warn you, I guess, that this doesn't just happen overnight. You're not just going to snap your fingers and be like, oh, okay, mom guilt is totally gone. I don't feel guilt anymore. No, this is a process of really getting curious and diving in, doing a lot of reflection, being curious, and also not being afraid of the feelings that are coming up. I think that's been a big one for me, is like I used to fear things like fear or anxiety or you know anger, any of those, feelings that feel really intense and really big to our bodies. It's becoming really aware of what's going on, and accepting that this is a normal part of me being human. It's a normal human experience, and it's nothing to be afraid of. Rather, it's a red flag, as I've mentioned in several of my other videos, these red flags of like kind of, hey, pay attention, something's going on here, and using that to your advantage. So, I want to share with you 5 things that I have done to help with mom guilt. They're all a little bit different, but I feel like they all really do mesh well together. And these are just the steps that I took. I would not say in any specific order. I would encourage you to look at these steps and do the one that feels right for you, the one that really feels like, oh, I can do this right now. It feels like obtainable. So yeah, think about that as I'm going through this, and I encourage you to take this slow and understand it's a process. Give yourself that timeline of, it doesn't need to happen today. I do not need to, get rid of this guilt today. And sometimes there's even just freedom in that, freedom in knowing that you don't have to hold on to it. You don't have to carry that mom guilt forever. So the very first thing that I think I would do if I could go back and tell myself what I know now is I need to regulate my nervous system, learn all about my nervous system, figure out how to do that. I didn't realize when I was pregnant with my second, I was having really bad neck pain. I had really bad headaches. It was terrible. I felt horrible, honestly. And my midwife recommended that I go to a chiropractor. And for the first time in my life, just a few months after starting to go, my anxiety was less. It was, I mean, getting close to being non existent. And I really didn't have the words as to why. I just knew that it was working. So I'm not saying that like you have to go to a chiropractor by any means, but I would start looking into your nervous system, look into how you can start regulating that. I did do an entire podcast episode on emotional regulation for us as parents. I will link that below after this live, but that's a great place to start. Another thing is somatics. I have been doing those for the last month, or well, it's probably been 2 months now, and I've seen such a huge difference in how I've been able to stay in that really calm state and not stay in fight or flight. That's kind of the key. We're always going to go there, like it's going to happen, but how can I get myself back to that calm state? And it feels like I have more of a tolerance even for myself. Like I feel like I have more compassion, more patience for my anxieties or fears. And I feel like I can be a bit more logical because I'm in that safety zone rather than being in fight or flight. Like I need to figure this out right now. So that's kind of how the nervous system regulation works with mom guilt. I know it kind of seems like an out of left field thing, but I really do believe that all these things are connected as one. Okay, so step two is focusing on a healthy relationship with myself. This was another thing that I did very unintentionally. I started doing a pro metabolic kind of way of eating. I would say it's very like similar to like ancestral eating. And I really wanted to start listening to my body. I wanted to get to know what I was needing food wise. I had a very unhealthy relationship with food. And so I needed to create this relationship with myself that was based in understanding that I could trust myself. I did a whole podcast episode on trusting my motherly intuition. Um, and just really, yeah, getting to know like what was going on for me. And that's where that self-love really started because I started to learn things like me being like super super skinny while I looked okay. I mean, I kind of looked sickly looking back if you go back to like my really old YouTube videos before I got pregnant. But like I did not have a healthy relationship with food. I was really restrictive and it restricted my body. It restricted my mind and I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the ability to be able to be there for myself. I didn't have the capacity to be able to kind of expand into, um, yeah, myself. And so I would say over the last 3 years, there has been just this progression of learning how to have this healthy relationship with myself. And this has been a very holistic approach. It's been me really, like I said, listening to things like, just even like what sounds good for food, not like what's good for you, not what's right for you. Like, let's just get back to like what feels good. And then if we talk at like how I would look at myself and how I would look at my body, that also has dramatically changed. And that instead of telling myself like, girl, like you need to like do some more crunches at the gym, I'm like, man, you carried two babies and you get to show people that you've carried two babies and that's so cool. Like you would have given anything to do that when you were trying to conceive. I didn't care how many pounds I weighed after I had kids when I was trying to conceive. Like that didn't matter to me. And when did that become, such a thing for me? One more part of this that I believe is a really huge way to finding that self-compassion is understanding what was going on for me, um, and having that compassion on my story and why I became the way I was. So, really stepping into and understanding, like, why was I the way I was? Why did I do these things? Digging into really the past. I did that a lot through my counseling, but it really expanded and I really began to dive into uh, why I was the way I was when I was in parent coaching school. There was so much that I learned about myself and the way I was parented, the way I was treated by friends, the way I communicated. And this doesn't mean I do any of it perfectly, but I began to understand why I was the way I was, why I did have fear, why I did have anxiety. And I began to realize that it wasn't useful for me. It wasn't something that was supporting me, supporting my life. And so, yeah, I think that realization was really huge in helping me find that self compassion piece. And this is something that I do help my clients work through is, finding that compassion piece for ourselves and sometimes just hearing from another human, you know, all the beautiful things about yourself that they can see. Sometimes that in itself is just so validating and it just helps you to kind of open up and say, wow, there are so many beautiful things about me. And I don't have to cling on to the negative. I don't have to cling on to the things that are so hard, right? I don't have to cling on to the fears and the anxieties and so much of that really makes up that mom guilt. So the third thing that I feel like is important is putting words to what I was feeling. So let's go back to that moment when I was in the hospital and I was bleeding and I thought I was having a miscarriage. And let's go there and say, like, imagine if I told myself that in this moment, I was feeling fear, I was feeling anxiety, I was feeling worry, and that was not an indication of the fact that I was a bad mom. I think that's where really mom guilt comes from. We don't want to be a bad mom. We want to be, doing the best that we can. I mean, for many of us, I know myself, it was perfectionism. It was, if I'm not being the best, then I'm the worst. And so when I was able to put actual words, feelings to what was going on for me, it helped me to disconnect the fact that this does not make up who I am. But we're going to talk more about this a little bit later about beliefs, but this was really a huge step for me. The fourth thing I would do is identify my unmet need. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the feelings, and I learned about these feelings and needs from nonviolent communication. I will link after this live the nonviolent communication, the unmet needs, and well, I guess it's just your needs in general. So your needs and your feelings, and you guys can take a look at those. But when you're able to kind of pair those, this is what I'm feeling and this is what I'm needing. Like for me, when I was in the hospital, it's like, I was feeling fear, but what was I really needing? I was needing reassurance. I mean, maybe I was just even needing comfort, right? Like, because reassurance would have been really hard at that point in time. It would have been really difficult for doctors to reassure me when they didn't know anything. So maybe I was just looking for, just that comfort. And could I have verbalized that? Like, could I have verbalized that to my husband? Yeah, I could have, and I should have. I should have, been able to say to him, like, hey, I'm feeling really anxious and really worried, and right now I'm just needing comfort. And being able to really identify what we're needing, and that helps us to disconnect, like I said earlier, disconnect from the fact that we are a bad parent. Because truthfully, at the when you boil it down, at the base of everything, there is good intention as a parent. Guilt comes from this just deep desire to do good, but it's when we let that overwhelm us, let that take control of our lives, that it really starts to affect how we show up as a parent. And so we need to start releasing that guilt, and we do that by understanding those feelings and those needs, and verbalizing those to those around us so they can help us to get to where we need to be. And sometimes this is even now like me verbalizing this to my kids. I'm feeling angry right now, or I'm feeling frustrated, and I'm needing some space, or I'm needing a few deep breaths. I'm needing to calm myself down. It's letting them know exactly what we are needing. So that way everybody around is also aware. And then they're not going to be upset with you either, because they're like, oh, I just want to help you. I just want to help you to work through whatever you're going through. And there's definitely very little judgment at that point. So the fifth and very last thing is allowing myself to feel every emotion and not fear them. So I had mentioned this earlier in this live, but I want us to really become aware of the feelings that are going on within us and not fearing them. I think that as a Christian, I was really confused around feelings. I actually did a whole podcast episode on gentle parenting and Christianity, and just kind of how that went hand in hand. But one of the things that I was blown away with when I was studying, how do these two things even align? According to the church, it's so separate. So it didn't make any sense to me. So as I began studying it, I realized that feelings were not a problem. I mean, there were so many people in the Bible who who were feeling feelings, right? They had these strong emotions. I mean, we look at Jesus in the temple courts and he is like angry and he's overturning tables. And like, I mean, he acted on them, right? And like for me, it's rather like let's notice and let's pay attention to, those feelings. Let's see what's going on and let's not be afraid of them. Let's use them as I've mentioned before, those kind of red flags of like, what's going on for me here. We allow that to be that curiosity, right? The curiosity is going to lead to us having a better understanding of ourselves, which again is going to aid in that self-compassion piece, which is what I believe was the turning point for me with the mom guilt. And it's not to say that I never feel mom guilt anymore. I mean, it surely happens from time to time. But there's a much faster turnover rate from the time that I feel the mom guilt to the time that it seems to, to go away, I guess, to say it very simply. So the next part of this that I just feel like needs to be addressed is having like verbal empathy for yourself. I didn't want to like make this a sixth step just because it didn't feel like a step, but as we were talking about compassion, I think it's important to really like I mentioned, it's like when we can change how our mind is thinking about ourselves, the mom guilt starts to go away because we're really trusting ourselves. Again, in that podcast episode that I did about motherly intuition, it's like I want to just trust who I am deep in my core. And when I trust that version of myself and I'm able to show up as that version of myself, the mom guilt isn't there. And so one of the tools that I used was this verbal self-empathy. And so the kind of the formula here is when I'm feeling that guilt, I'm saying I am feeling, fear because I am needing, and this is where your need comes in, and that's where really those steps 3 and 4 come together. Is I'm feeling fear because I'm needing reassurance that he's going to grow up and he's not going to be hitting people when he's 25. Like sometimes it's as simple as that. I do have a few examples here that I'm going to share because I think that these will help you. But let's say I'm feeling anxious because I'm needing an understanding of what's normal versus abnormal in the first trimester. For me, that was what would have been really helpful is like, what is normal? Like, I think that so many of those fears around the first trimester would have been gone. So much of that guilt would have been gone if I could really get to an understanding of what I was needing. And imagine if I had just said to my midwife, hey, I'm feeling really anxious about this first trimester. Can you give me a better understanding of, what is normal and what is abnormal, what I should be looking for, signs and symptoms, what can I be doing? And I bet you I would not have struggled as much with the mom guilt because I would have had the knowledge of I am on the right path. And I think that's why these videos that I continue creating feel so impactful for parents because you're getting the tools. You have these resources now to continually keep coming back to add to your toolkit. And it's like the more you understand and the more you know, the better you can do. You're more apt to choose not the guilt part, right? And to actually use the guilt to motivate you to change, however something is going, or to let it go because it's not useful, right? And so I think that it's important to just kind of pause for a moment and really evaluate, like, mom guilt. Is this serving me? Is this thought that I'm having, is this feeling that I'm having, is it serving me? And is it helping me to either keep my child safe, to help me to be a better parent, and most of the time the helping me to be a better parent thing is not the case. And at times though, it is. Like, let's say I do yell at my daughter and I do feel that guilt. Yeah, it's a red flag for, hey, like that was not how I want to show up as a parent. I am loving and I am compassionate. And in that reflective time that we have with ourselves, we're able to reflect on that. And we're able to say, yeah, like that was not how I wanted to show up. I wanted to show up with love and empathy. And I even like going down to like the exact like script of what I would say next time, because I'm more apt to choose that over staying stuck in that guilt and really ruminating in it. My last example is something like this. So, um, I am feeling hurt because I value kindness and you were back talking to me. And I think that I think as parents, we're afraid to kind of tell our children how that makes us feel, especially like with the gentle parenting space. They say like, oh, don't say that made me sad or that made me upset or that, because you're supposed to kind of have this like, I feel like this really like tough exterior. At least that's kind of how I feel with like respectful parenting too, is like kind of this tough exterior. And for me, it's like, I want to let my child into how this was actually making me feel. Like, let's say your child was like, I hate you and I think you're the worst mom. Saying like, yeah, that really hurt my feelings. Like that makes me feel really sad. And I feel sad because I really value kindness. I value that you speak to me in a way that is respectful, that is loving, that's important to me. And from there, that's really our child's job to, yeah, notice within themselves. And this isn't just like they will be like, oh yeah, okay, sure, mom, I'm so sorry. That doesn't always happen that way, but sometimes it does, especially with older kids. It can happen much faster because they're like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have said that, or yeah, that was horribly mean. And they kind of have these realizations. So the last part of the releasing of mom guilt is to journal, to talk with a trusted friend. I mean, ideally your partner, um, and really get to the bottom of what is triggering that mom guilt, what the reason for it is, what your the reason why you're hanging on to it so tightly. Is it because you're trying to punish yourself, or is it just because you are just stuck in the circle, in the process of having something happen, mom guilt, and just kind of that continual process. Because that can be all it is. And when we can understand, why am I doing this? Why does this keep happening? We are able to really start moving on past that. So, something that I also did in this reflective moment was I asked my husband to very gently let me know when I am guilting and shaming myself. And this is a great way to keep yourself accountable as well. And typically, like our spouses, they can tell when we are in a shame circle or a shame cycle, and they can see when we're starting to guilt ourselves. And maybe you just say, hey, when you notice me doing that, can you just give me a hug? And that'll kind of be my trigger for, oh yeah, I'm guilting and shaming myself. And I needed that physical love, or that physical, that physical touch to kind of help me break out of that, and then be able to have a conversation around, why is this happening for me? And oftentimes, hold on, I had a thought. I'm reading my notes and I'm like, wait, is that what I wanted to say? Okay, let me see. Oftentimes to be okay, yeah. So okay, I get what I was saying now. So yeah, so when I would start this negative self-talk, that's when the mom guilt would start. And so it was caused by, maybe a fear, and then the really hard critiquing myself, and then the negative self-talk within that. And that would really cause me to stay stuck in the mom guilt. And so it wasn't until I could talk about the mom guilt and really get it out, and get to the triggers and what was going on for me, and why I was so stuck in it. And again, my childhood, my patterns, my experiences, everything that shaped me, and is causing this to be an issue for me. And when I began to really understand that, and then let it go. And for me, it's just talking to my husband about it. Uh, that's when I feel like I finally was able to say, that's it. I'm done. This is not serving me. I don't need it anymore. Mom guilt is only holding me back from being the parent that I know I can be and that I really want to be. So, yeah, I hope that that was helpful in some way. And I hope that, you can start to shift your mind from feeling like you need to keep the mom guilt to keep yourself accountable, to keep yourself growing and becoming a better parent. Because for me, when I was able to finally let it go and finally find freedom from it, I was able to really step into who I believed I was called to be. And that's a beautiful, awesome, and exciting moment when you're able to finally do that. So the next thing that I find goes hand in hand with mom guilt is this feeling of shame. I think that every parent struggles with shame. I think that every parent struggles to become better because they are stuck in this shame cycle. And as I mentioned, in the live earlier, is like, am I using shame as a way to punish myself? So this way I will become a better parent? Yes, absolutely. That was what I was doing. I thought that the more that I shamed myself, the harder I was in myself, the more negative I was, the more that would motivate me to become a more kind and loving parent. But what happened was I started focusing in on this negative thing about myself, the maybe the fact that I yelled at my daughter and I was so loud, and I really believed that I was angry. I believed that I was an angry parent. And the more that I told myself that I am an angry parent, and the more I shamed myself for it, the more stuck I was. It never made me become a better parent. It only made me question myself. It only made me honestly do more of those things because my brain was constantly looking for confirmation of you are a bad parent. And that's what I feel like shame does to us. It really, it wants to keep us stuck. It wants to hold us. And when we can really release that, understand why we're doing it, and gain, I guess, a better understanding of when it's happening and why it's happening, I think that we will find true freedom from the shame, and we'll find ways to do it differently. I do want to mention here, though, that you're never going to stop feeling shame completely. It's not like shame is just like, oh, I'll never experience that again. Rather, it's like, let me learn how to handle shame when it comes up. So this way it doesn't stick around and it doesn't affect who I am. It's rather noticing, paying attention to, and moving forward in a way that makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you want to do better, like you want to become a better parent. So, if you've been around my channel for a while, you will know that I love Brene Brown. I think all her work on shame is amazing. It was one of the very first things I did when I started counseling almost 8 years ago. I started reading all of her books, and I needed to get to an understanding of what shame was and what guilt was, because I was using those two words interchangeably. And I think in our culture, we do. We really use guilt and shame as two interchangeable things, and they're so very different. In the live I did about releasing mom guilt, it's like, yeah, like there is so much that we can do to release that guilt. And that guilt, I mean, it can be bad if we're staying stuck in it, right? And we're using shame as a tool to keep us stuck in it. But guilt in and of itself is not bad. It's not something that I ever want to run away from. I want to use it as a tool to help me to see my blind spots, to help me to see where I need to grow, where my weaknesses are. And that way I can move forward. So I can learn how to make a better choice or decision next time. And I think that it's important to know the difference between the two. I did do a video about, I think it was a podcast episode about, are you shaming your children? And I do go in a lot more detail about shame and guilt there, but I want to give you a bit of a difference here so you understand, yeah, like the difference between, are you shaming yourself or are you guilting yourself? So that way you can know which avenue to take. So shame is when you are saying statements to yourself like, I am bad. It's really this like, I am. It's this core belief that I am, yeah, I'm bad. Guilt is, I did something bad. It doesn't attach to your identity. And when you've done something bad and you can say, oh, I did something bad, it's more of like, I did something bad and I got to figure out a way to make sure that doesn't happen again. And when you're saying I am bad, that is becoming who you are. And so for years, I would say, I'm anxious and I'm miserable and, I'm angry. And I did a whole entire workshop on anger, and I talk a lot more about that in there. But the anger was calling me, or not calling me, but the anger was causing me rather um, to to shame myself and to tell myself that I was angry. It was not motivating me like guilt would. Guilt would be like, I was feeling really angry and I need to figure out a way to fix this. I need to figure out a way to not do that again. And it was not useful. And so I needed to really pinpoint and understand that that was not useful for me. That was not useful for my family, for me as a mother, for growth. It was just keeping me held back. I was stuck. And I really needed to release that for myself. I think looking back, what I needed to understand was the stories that I had created about myself, such as the I am angry, the limiting beliefs, I am angry, the shame that was caught up within that, because they were so deeply ingrained. I needed to figure out how to repattern them. I needed to figure out how to not let those be on a consistent cycle, right? I needed to figure out how to allow myself to really let them go and release them and be free. So I'm getting off topic, you guys. You know that I could just talk about this stuff all day and I would be here on this live for 3 hours. So there are 4 things that I think are one of the most helpful things when freeing yourself from shame. And so the first thing is noticing when you are shaming yourself. So this is going to be those moments, which we'll talk about negative self-talk in a bit, but these are going to be those moments where you're saying, I'm a horrible mother. I am so angry. I am a bad parent. I hate, my kids, and I hate being, a parent. I hate being dragged around to all these different places. It's really, these moments where we start to shame motherhood, shame ourselves, and becoming aware of that. Some people really like to keep a journal of this. They will, maybe in their phone, keep a note or physically write it down every time they notice themselves shaming. This way they can pinpoint where that shame is coming from, which leads me to step 2, understanding the belief around the shame. And this is actually what I do in coaching. I help my clients to understand what belief is causing them to stay stuck in this constant state of shame. Why are they hanging on to this shame as a parent? And it's really amazing to see the belief that is probably ingrained from your childhood that is still showing up today. And every time your child does it, you are being triggered. And that to me is so eye-opening when we are able to uncover that. And parents are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this belief was rooted, one, back to my childhood, but two, it is it is literally bleeding into every area of my life. And usually it's just this one big core belief that is just keeping us stuck and really just holding us down. The third thing is to create a new belief about yourself. So if you are saying, I am an angry parent, maybe instead you say, I am a peaceful parent. And step four, which, kind of goes along with step three here, is now we got to make a baby step on that. I don't want you to say, okay, great, I am going to be a peaceful parent now. It's not going to happen. You're not just going to become a peaceful parent because you've said, oh, I'm going to be a peaceful parent today. It comes in these very actionable baby steps. And so maybe to become a peaceful parent, let's kind of backtrack. Let's figure out the steps, or let's figure out the behaviors of what a peaceful parent is to you. And maybe one of those steps is you want to take a second before you respond. You don't want to have that knee-jerk reaction when your child does something. So for this week, you're just going to work on taking one deep breath, not even three, but just one deep breath every single time your child does something that's triggering for you, or every time you realize that your child has done something that's triggering for you. These small steps, as you start to place them on top of each other, will start to build this new identity and will really help you to let go of that shame. So I think that it's time that we become comfortable with the shame, become comfortable with what's going on for us internally, those fears and those anxieties, um, and know that they are so deeply rooted in our bodies. They're deeply rooted in our minds. Their patterns are hardwired. But the good news is that you can rewire them. It does take time and it does take patience. But again, that's where those baby steps come in. And you get to become that, peaceful, calm parent that you so wanted to be, because this new belief of I am a peaceful parent is going to start coming to life. And your brain is going to start looking more for the ways that you are stepping into that peaceful parent rather than the ways that you are being that angry parent. And one day you're going to realize that there's not as much shame, or maybe even no shame, around who you are. And that belief doesn't even exist. I am angry doesn't even exist. And in that moment, I truly believe that you found freedom and you have found the gateway to fulfilling your potential as a parent. Okay, so the third thing I want to talk about today is being hard and critical about yourself and how that is keeping you stuck. So I can remember punishing myself for the way that I treated my daughter, really the way I treated everybody. But when there was a behavior that I did not like, I would get so angry, more internally than I did externally. I didn't really do a whole lot of like yelling or anything. But when I got to a point that I was done and I was angry, I would blow up. I would lose my mind. And I thought that the harder I was on myself, the more critical I was, the more that I could hurt myself mentally, that would stop the behavior. But the craziest part is that is what was keeping me stuck. That is what was keeping me stuck in this terrible cycle of guilt and shame, which I talked about earlier in this live, is just like, yeah, just keeping myself in this icky state of just about myself. And the more I felt icky about myself, the more I would do those things because my brain was trying to find facts that I was that way. Back in the video where I talked about shame, it's like what I was doing was hanging on to this belief that I am angry, right? I am an angry parent. And that is just a limiting belief. And so when I was able to shift from I am an angry parent to I am a peaceful parent, I am a calm parent, that didn't just make me a calm parent, that is what helped me to move into the baby steps, which I share a lot more about in that video. But I thought that if I was hard on myself, if I could critique myself, that I would change my behavior for good. And I wish that somebody had told me that this was only causing me to be a worse parent, that it wasn't actually helpful. And I learned this, by the way, from how I was parented. And so when I had this realization when I was in school of like, you are only treating yourself that way because that was the way you were taught that change happened within yourself. It was like, I can't treat my daughter this way. I can't be explosive. I can't be angry. I can't. And then I started realizing and having all these realizations that I needed to make true change. And true change meant that I needed to get curious about my triggers. I needed to gain awareness and understanding of what was going on for me deep within, where this was coming from, learning to have that self compassion, which I talked about in the mom guilt video. And so, yeah, really coming to this place of saying, yeah, like this is not working for me. The critiquing myself and being so hard on myself was only holding me back from being the parent that I knew that I really, really, really wanted to be and that I could be. And I'm really proud to say that, like, all this time later, I am the parent that I wanted to be. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. I mean, I messed up yesterday big time, but I'm not still punishing myself today for that. It's a brand new day. It's a fresh start. And I have no fears around, am I ruining my children? Because I'm not. I'm doing the very best I can. I'm showing up again and again and again. And that's what our children need and they really want from us, is just this consistency of showing up, and not showing up perfectly, by the way, just showing up. Which I've talked about so much. All right, let me look at my notes because I'm going to start getting off topic. Okay, so let me get into the things that I did to stop being hard on myself. And so the first thing that I did to stop being so hard on myself was doing inner work. And this was where I created this coherent narrative of what happened to me as a child. I mentioned earlier that I talked about these patterns, and like, my parents were very good parents, and they meant well by everything that they did, and I know that. But that doesn't mean that they did everything perfect or they did everything well. And I think that's what the key here is to remember, is that our parents, they weren't bad. I mean, no parent has bad intentions, truly. Even some of the worst parents that I've done study on, it's in them that they do want good. They do want good for their kids. Most parents want their kids to have the best abilities and the best life. That's what they're really grooming them for. But at times they can get stuck in how they were parented, and it's just a cycle. And so I needed to understand what happened, why it happened. And I had to get curious within myself, like, why? Why do I get so triggered? Why do I feel angry? Why is this happening? And when I was able to understand really the story and put it all together, that self-compassion piece came in. And I also really didn't feel the need to cling on to all that negativity that was constantly just swirling in my mind, really, where the subconscious level of things were happening. I wasn't needing to tell myself that I was an angry mom or that I was a terrible parent, because it no longer felt useful, because I understood why. Why was I being this way? Why was I having this belief? It made a lot more sense. The second thing I did was I made sense of how I was parented. And this is part of that coherent narrative. But I think what's key here is that I actually dug into like the way my parents parented. And for any child, they need to understand where their parents came from, why they did what they did. And that kind of bigger picture piece really helps us to have compassion for our parents and for ourselves. It helps us to say, okay, this wasn't just done because I was a bad kid or because I was angry or because I, you know, I was mean to people. Like, this happened because of the way my family was raised, because of the way, my mom was treated. And she did better than, was taught to her. But it's time for me to really break that cycle, right? It's my turn to take these things that our parents did that was not useful, and we need to break those. And so making sense of how I was parented was so freeing and helping me to, free that critical thinking of myself. The third thing I did was I began prioritizing nervous system regulation. Nervous system regulation is, I think, the top thing for parents. I think that I could just talk about nervous system regulation all day, every day. And I don't even think I would be able to give you all the tools and resources, because I don't even know it all. It is so complex, and there's so much that goes on within it. And so, yeah, I think that if you're like, okay, where do I start with nervous system regulation? I do have a podcast episode where I talk about emotional regulation, but you can start with things like somatics, doing things like singing. You can do things like giving yourself this butterfly hug. This always feels good. Doing things like this, finding calm down tools, which is exactly what these things are. Figuring out how to keep your body calm and start kind of training it to stay out of that fight and flight and stay into that calm zone when necessary, right? Most of the time, we don't need to be in fight or flight, but we are stuck in fight and flight because that is all we know. That is how we feel like we need to survive. And we need to figure out, is that useful? Is that really helping us to become the parent that we, need to be? And the answer is no. We learn the best. We are able to function the best when we are in that really calm state. And so it's important that we start really exercising our body and our systems to get comfortable there. And it's not something, again, that happens overnight. It's something that is really that gradual building block. And you get to start doing that today. You can start right now. And that's the cool part about nervous system regulation. So the last thing that I'm going to say here is just that once I began doing these three things, I started to see these glimmers of hope. And that was where I really attached to the phrases like, I am a peaceful parent, or I'm a calm parent. And I really tried my best to allow my brain to start looking for the signs that was true. And the more that I started looking for those signs, the more hope I found, and the more I wanted to look for those. And honestly, the more I believed that there was hope for myself and that I could free myself from just, the way that I was talking to myself. I feel like I was finally able to say, this is not useful for me. This is not helping me. And I get to let go, and I get to be free. The last thing that I want to talk about here is how to reprogram yourself from negative self-talk so you can thrive as a parent. Because for me, in my story, negative self-talk was causing me so much anger towards myself. As I mentioned in several of the videos about shame and critical thinking and guilt, it's like, that was my way of punishing myself so that way I didn't do a behavior again. And it didn't work. It didn't help. It didn't make things stop. It only honestly intensified them. And our brain, all it wants to do is see the bad and confirm the bad, right? It's like it likes negativity because that's its protective mechanism. It's how it's going to keep us safe, but it's not always useful. And so we need to train our brain when that is useful and when it's not useful. And so most of the time, that negative self talk about ourselves is not useful. That's why I explained in the video about feeling shame as a parent. It's like that is not shame is not helping you to be a better parent. Guilt will help you. Guilt is a motivator. It's kind of like this red flag that alerts you like, hey, you could do this differently next time. And the shame is really this core belief. But I explain more about that in that video. So if you want to listen to that, you can head over there. But I remember the phrase, I am the worst mother ever. Why am I so mean to my kids? I hate that I am an angry parent. Like, these were the words that were filled in my subconscious. And I needed to figure out how to change that. I needed to figure out how to make a kinder, more loving, compassionate, empathetic uh, talk to myself. And I think that when I started doing, there's four things that I did to start getting rid of these negative words, subconscious phrases in my mind. Um, I think that I didn't realize that I didn't have to be that way. I didn't have to be so mean to myself. I could actually see a heck of a lot more progress and change with loving myself, having compassion for myself, talking kindly to myself, just as I would a friend. And when I stopped focusing on the negative of myself, and I really started to look for all the ways that I was a good mother, I was a peaceful mother, I was a slow, calm mother, the more I was able to do that because my brain started looking for all the ways that I was doing that. And the more that I was doing it and I was enjoying it, I was like, I want to do more of this. I'm going to do this every day. I want to do this all the time. How can I do more of this? And so, how do you reprogram? How do you reprogram your brain so you can let go of these negative phrases, this negative self talk? So, the first thing that I would do is take note of all your subconscious thoughts. You can write these in a journal. You can write them on your phone. You could literally just take a mental note and say, what are these negative subconscious thoughts going on? And for me, it was, what I mentioned earlier, I'm the worst mother. Why am I so mean? Why do I yell all the time? It was these phrases, and a lot of them were confirming of a belief. And so that's step 2 here, is understanding the belief. This is what I help, again, my coaching clients to do, is like, let's figure out what is going on beneath these subconscious thoughts. Let's understand your core belief. If your core belief is, I am an angry parent, let's understand that. Let's understand what the negativity is and where it comes from. So that is really digging back into your story, digging back into how you were parented, and making a coherent story of why you are the way you are, why you have this belief. This third thing that you want to do is look for a more supportive belief. And I really cringed when I first heard about the I am statements, but it really made sense when I started studying guilt and shame. And I understood that, I am, bad, as Brene Brown mentions, is like, that is shaming yourself. It's this deep core belief. And that guilt of, I did something bad is really motivating us, right? So looking for a more supportive belief of I am calm, I am kind, I am loving, any of those is going to help our brains to start looking for that. It's going to help us start saying, how am I a peaceful mom? And the more that we see it, like, I love writing these and putting them on my fridge, which I know is like totally like, okay, Alexis, we've all heard of I am statements, but it's different when you've understood the reason why you have that deep core belief and that you really want to change it. We're not just saying I am statements out of oh my goodness, my tongue is tied. Um, I am not saying that these positive I am statements are, for me, they're toxic positivity, right? Like, we don't want to just be like, I am kind, I am loving, I am grateful, I am, like that's toxic positivity, and that's not doing anything. We are literally just taking one piece of this puzzle, one limiting belief. We are making this brand new supportive belief that is going to help you to become a better parent. And then we're going to make a baby step. So this is step 4. You're going to make a baby step towards living out this new belief. And, in the I am angry example, again, we could go to like, I am, calm, or I am peaceful. I'm a peaceful parent. And maybe instead of coming in at your kids and being like, what's going on? Why are we all, maybe you actually step back and then you get low. That's all you're going to do. That doesn't mean that you're not going to yell. That doesn't mean that you're not going to do any of the other stuff. But let's just work on a baby step. And I think that that is going to help parents to start actually implementing these and seeing real change, because we want to actually change these things. We don't want to, like, my biggest fear is like toxic positivity. I do not want anybody to get so engulfed in really using positive statements to make themselves feel positive. It does work, and it'll work for a period of time, but it's not a forever thing. And it's not really changing the wiring, which in neuroplasticity, that is what is taught, is like you can completely rewire the brain, but it takes a lot of little baby steps and work, and it can happen, and it's absolutely possible.